my pleasure to be speaking with Yoni Battat, who is a multi-instrumentalist who will be performing Middle Eastern Arabic Jewish music at the festival this year. And he's going to bring with him a small ensemble. Yoni grew up in New Haven, Connecticut, in a Jewish family with Iraqi and Polish ancestry. He started on the violin at age 4, and as a young teen, immersed himself in Eastern European klezmer music, Hebrew songs, and liturgical melodies. It wasn't until he was given an oud by his Iraqi uncle that a whole new world of music opened up to him, exposing Yoni to his Iraqi Jewish Arabic musical roots. And I was wondering if, Yoni, if you could talk about that experience when you first went to Israel and attended this Middle Eastern music school.
Yeah, as a young musician, my grandfather wanted to bring me into the family tradition, and so he knew I would be interested in learning about the music from a more technical perspective. So he brought me to this Middle Eastern music school, Arab music school, in a town called Or Yehuda. And there I held an ode for the first time, and I had a lesson in what it means to well, the basics of Arab music, learning for the first time that there are notes that don't exist in Western music. And for me, as a classically trained violinist, that was totally mind-blowing and exciting. And it set me on a journey, first very slowly, of just kind of picking up the ode and noodling around with it and seeing what I could figure out. But as that progressed over the years, I got exposed to amazing teachers from across the Middle East and started to really sink deep into this music.
You know, it's interesting because the violin, of course, has no frets, as does the oud, right? So what you're talking about, and also I think I remember reading about you that you started with Suzuki violin, which is
Yeah, that's
focused
right.
on ear training, which is wonderful for Western musicians. But you're dealing with, Western scales. And then you're introduced to this Arabic makam modes, which, as you pointed out, have many more notes. I often think about it like if you had a box of Crayola crayons and you're like 5 years old, you might have eight colors in there, and then you're suddenly going to this big box with many more colors. Um, what was challenging about learning makam on the base of having your Western education?
Yeah, I feel like I'm still learning Makam and yeah, on the journey for it to feel more embodied and I'm constantly trying to listen more and trying to really ingest so much of this beautiful music. It's been a mixed experience. I think at the beginning I just sounded kind of out of tune to me, and I had to learn to really appreciate it. Um,
Yeah.
and I would say it wasn't until it started sounding good to me that I started feeling like, oh, I can actually replicate this in what feels like a true way, both on my instrument and also even in my voice, to be able to sing this music as well and to sing microtonal music. Um, you have to like it and you have to appreciate it and you have to want it to sound a certain way in order to be able to really replicate that.
Talk a little bit about the repertoire, the kinds of music that audiences will hear.
Yeah. So Mizrahi Jewish music is just it's one of those terms that used to be a derogatory term
Mm.
for Oriental people and especially Oriental Jews. And it's been reclaimed recently, and the reason it's resonant for me, this term, is because a lot of people think of the dichotomy of Sephardi and Ashkenazi Jews.
Yes.
And for my experience and my own family, who lived for thousands of years in Iraq, in Baghdad, in Babylon, they were there for 2,000 years, and their family has nothing to do with Sephardi Jews that come from Spain. So that's like a little bit of a distinction. So this term Mizrahi music is a little bit nebulous, but what I'm going to be performing at the festival is the music of my Arab Jewish roots. So that's
Okay.
Jewish music that would have been played by my family in Iraq, and as well as taking music from Jews in Syria, in Yemen, Morocco,
Mhm.
the Jewish repertoire that would accompany prayer and also just accompany the life moments of weddings. This tradition is called piyut, and
Yes.
piyut means liturgical poems. It's a devotional poem that is sung either in synagogue or at some sort of a ritual event, or just to mark a moment, a beautiful moment in life. And in the Mizrahi tradition, there is a rich repertoire of these piyutim, that's the plural, piyutim, and I'll be performing a bunch of my favorite ones that have really beautiful text with beautiful imagery and these amazing elaborate melodies. Some of the melodies even are taken directly from Arab music. So the Jews that lived in Iraq, for example, would have heard something in the pop music or perhaps in the folk music tradition or even in the Arab classical tradition and wanted to bring that into their prayer space. Instead of singing about a beautiful woman, maybe they're singing about the beauty of God. So adapting those pieces. And my family, for example, for whom Arabic was their first and most comfortable language, they would often adapt an Arab song in a way that using Hebrew words that sound almost the same as the Arabic words, even if it's not the same meaning. So the actual consonants and vowel sounds they would write a poem in Hebrew that fits the music that sounds almost like the Arabic. So there's a lot of that. I'll also be performing some of my own music over the last 5 to 10 years. As I've been kind of finding my own place in this music, I've been writing music that fills in different needs, whether it's a need for my own prayer, for example, when I'm in synagogue and I want a melody that's inspired by this music, but also a little bit more accessible to my communities that often aren't with a knowledge of Middle Eastern music. So I've been writing these melodies, and I'm excited to present some of those melodies at the festival. And also writing music that expresses my own experience as someone with a fragmented identity, someone who is trying to figure out my place of belonging in a world where there's not necessarily a lot of people like me, and where there's not a lot of transmission of this really special culture. And so my whole 2022 album, Fragments, is kind of about this experience. And so I'll be presenting music from the Fragments album as well, which ties together some of my own lyrics, some lyrics from Jewish liturgy and from like the Psalms, and also some of my poems in Arabic set to music, poems in Hebrew set to music, a big variety, basically with the unifying theme of my own Arab Jewish identity and bringing those pieces together.
No, that's fascinating. And I think, along with what you just said, there are going to be multiple performers at the festival that are dealing with these kind of fragmented, you're rediscovering roots that you're not immersed in when you were growing up, but as part of your ancestry. So that's it's almost a theme that's running through the festival. And I remember when we spoke earlier, you said at one point in Baghdad that 90% of the instrumental musicians were Jewish. Is that right? At some point.
Yeah, that's right. Jews played such an important part in the cultural scene of so many places because so many of these countries were mixed. They're mixed religions, and each part of the society had different roles that they played. And in Baghdad, in the first half of the 20th century, it was really like a cultural renaissance happening. And yes, 99% of the instrumentalists in Baghdad those years playing even secular music, pop music, they were Jews. I think partially because this was a career that maybe for Muslim society or any of the other number of groups that lived in Baghdad, this was not considered to be like a respectable career perhaps. But for Jews, there was a long tradition of studying music, and that was where they were able to claim their little piece of the cultural tradition. But also there were tons of Jewish poets and thinkers. But it really was it was a special time in Baghdad, and Jewish musicians were known and beloved by the community, and it was a very special time of coexistence and cross-pollination musically and culturally.
Very rich. So here you're now living in the Boston area, is that right?
Yeah.
So who is your community? Who are you drawing? Well, I mean, you're bringing some musicians with you. Are you finding a musical community that resonates with where you are right now in your journey?
Not exactly. There's not a lot of people that are doing Middle Eastern Jewish music specifically. But
Yeah.
the good news is that this tradition translates to people who know and study Arab music of any variety. And because it uses the same maqamat, it uses the same Middle Eastern musical modes as Arab music, and sometimes the same melodies as well. So I have these amazing musicians who are joining me, two percussionists, an amazing violinist, a bass player, all of whom have played lots of Arab music, whether or not they are Jewish or whether or not they share the same
Sure.
Middle Eastern Jewish identity that I do. It's a delight to be able to play with them and to be able to, for each of them to bring their own experiences and voices into
Right.
dialogue with this music as well.
Who is the violinist?
Bengisu Gokse is her name.
Okay.
She's
And
Turkish,
then,
actually.
okay.
And then we have James Hazelwood Dale on the bass,
Oh, I
amazing
know him.
jazz
Yes.
bassist, actually, yeah.
Yes.
And he plays a lot with Mehmet Ali Sanko.
Right. Sanko,
And then
right.
we have
And George
Fabio
Lernis. Yeah.
Pirozzolo. Say again?
Yes. George Lernis. Do you know George?
George Lernis is not going to be joining us this time,
Okay, but he
plays
I
a lot
mean,
with
he's
George
played.
Lernis.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
It's
I've
like
played a lot with George Lernis. I love George and love working with him. But yeah, so we have
Great.
Fabio Pirozzolo on percussion, who is from Italy. Actually, he came up with a tambourine tradition that is similar to the Arab tambourine. The Arab tambourine is called the riq, but he played a different tamburello type thing, and came up in that tradition. And so he was able to transfer his skills over to the Arab riq, and now plays a lot of Arab music. And then the last one is my childhood friend, actually, Jesse Shevin, who's coming up from New York to join us. And he is he's one of my longest musical collaborators, and plays beautifully Arab music on darbuka. He plays with a band called Taktuka in New York City that does Lebanese Jordanian music.
Great. Oh, great. It sounds like a wonderful ensemble. And just I think this will give people a lot of things to think about cultural identity. I mean, there's religion, but there's also cultural identity, and there's mixing in a way that people have not been exposed to so much before. I think it's going to be enlightening. And if you
Yeah, thank you.
yeah, and do you have can you leave us with like just a wish or a hope for what you hope audience members take away from hearing your group?
Yeah, I hope that people will be left with some curiosity about the history of Jews in the Arab world, and some curiosity about these dichotomies we hold of Arab and Jew, and the ways that they can overlap in those identities, and also just a sense of the deep humanity and beauty that is held within these beautiful traditions, which I'm sure audiences will get from all of the performances at the festival, and I'm just excited to be one little part of it.
Well, we're delighted to have you, and I look forward to hearing you on stage.
Thank you so much.